Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode. My name is Hans
I'm Edward.
and we are your hosts for now and forevermore. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at the importance of source material in terms of storytelling. Hey Edward?
Yeah, because I get writing a new story, I get thinking up something else, but if you're going to put yourself within an established world, it gets a little bit iffy, you know?
Yeah, it
So,
can be a
yeah.
little sparse if it's not fully developed. So
Yeah.
in tandem with this episode, we do implore our wonderful listeners, or rather, if you're new to listening to our podcast, to please feel free to go back and listen to episodes 81, 82, and 84. Because in those episodes, we speak about lore in video games and why it's so important for it to be fleshed out and how they can make video games better, as well as canon in terms of the overall universes that we see, whether it's Marvel or Star Wars or anything else like that, and then also adaptations. How people take books, for example, and turn them into movies, or video games into books, whatever the case may be. We cover a lot of these topics. And the reason why I'm mentioning that right now is because we're going to be alluding to a lot of these things. So if anything in this interest actually, piques your interest, have a look in the notes below, because I will list them right there in the very intro, which episodes we believe would accompany this one quite nicely.
It's our source material, if you will.
Oh, that is actually brilliant, Edward.
Yeah.
That
I have
was
one or two of those.
that was very well played. That was very good. So yes, I suppose Edward has just rather humorously pointed out how our source material for this episode, other than our vast, swathes of general knowledge, are other episodes that we've actually delved into certain topics which are all somewhat interconnected. I mean, if it was up to Edward and myself, we'd talk for hours and hours and hours and things, but there are moments where we were just like, you know what, let's try and focus it as much as possible onto one topic. Which
just a
brings
teeny
me
bit.
back to what today is about. So today's one is, once again, just the importance of source material. Because, one of the best examples of this, and I know Edward and I have actually spoken about this numerous times on Gettle over the last 2 years, is Game of Thrones, and how George R.R. Martin he's written a fair amount of books. However, the last 3 seasons of Game of Thrones were not based on any text. They were basically just given a rough outline of how George R. R. Martin thinks or thought at the time the story would play out. And then it was up to the showrunners and the show writers to embellish that wireframe. Unfortunately, they did not do a very good job, and Edward and I have spoken at length as to why.
Yeah, it's actually funny when you can see the source material running out, because in season 5-ish, you can start seeing things are starting to become different. Now, you should take note that they still had something to work on during this season. They still had a basis because it just ran out, so they still had all of these stories interconnected, which is fine. That's not having source material, but that's still having something to go with, at least.
I suppose
Something more than just an idea.
Yeah,
and then season 6 hit, and season 7 hit.
But
And
in all fairness, I didn't think that 6 and 7 were all that bad.
No, but you can see it going down.
I mean,
is what I'm.
you could see it in little things like how one character's here one moment and then the next episode they're somewhere else. Whereas in previous seasons, you would actually watch the journey and things would happen in the journey and would be a little bit more believable, a little bit more realistic. Now, one of the main reasons why we want to speak about this today, it's not necessarily because we want to bitch about Game of Thrones, which has just become a pastime at this point in time.
Yeah, it's a hobby.
But it's more to do with the fact that quite recently, Edward watched the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, the first movie of the 3 that have recently come out. And over the last weekend, I actually watched the final, well, not the final, but the 3rd film in the franchise, which is Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, The Secrets of Dumbledore. And upon Edward watching the first one, and myself rather reluctantly watching the third film in this franchise, it was just interesting when I asked Edward what he thought, because he was immediately like, "No, this is terrible. Like,
It's
it's just
so bad,
you
man.
don't know what's going on. They don't explain anything, and it's really not very good." Now, unfortunately, that theme remains throughout the three films, and upon discussing this, it really came to the point whereby there is a severe lack of source material to a degree with regards
Mm.
to these films. So before we completely trash them, which is what or rather, before we get to discussing why they're as bad as they are, we need to go back and look at where these films come from. So we know J.K. Rowling wrote the first 7 Harry Potter books, okay, from Philosopher's Stone through to Deathly Hallows Part 2.
Yeah.
And they're brilliant. They really, really are brilliant. The books, they flesh out this universe in the most remarkable of ways, regardless of what you think of the author. She did a phenomenal job, to the point where there are even things that are in the first book that you don't realize are significant until you read the final book. Now, that is a work of art to me. You know,
Mm.
she's woven this immaculate tapestry with pieces throughout where you can reread and reread and reread the franchise and always see something new, something you may have not seen before. It's really just, it's remarkable. There's a reason why Harry Potter has done as well as it's done, okay?
Yeah.
Now, of course, that then translates to the films, because the films all had excellent source material from which to be produced. Not only was there the novel, but there was also J.K. Rowling, who has written a lot about the universe in her own manuscripts, stuff that haven't been published. Just, her own, like, let's say a Wizarding World encyclopedia, all right?
Yeah.
So the movies were, in that respect, very good. So now let's push it out a couple of years. J.K. Rowling is retconning certain things and changing things to fit in with the times, allegedly. Who knows? Because, she never really mentioned them in her books, but now, to go with whatever's happening, right now, she's sort of modifying her work. Okay, no worries, no worries. That's a discussion for another day. So everybody then hears about Wizarding World of Harry Potter, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, and we're all like, "Oh, that sounds amazing," because there is actually a book called Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them.
Yeah. A little
It's
novella.
Yes, it's very small. It was released to support, I think it was an animal charity at the time, so all proceeds went to whatever charity it was. But it's very small and it has no story. So it's essentially like a compendium or encyclopedia of creatures from the Harry Potter universe in this little book. So
Yeah.
from that, apparently, they decided to make a film series which would follow a character called Newt Scamander, who was new and created specifically for the films, as far as I understand. Although he might be in the books, I'm not entirely sure. I think he might have been the
Well,
author of the book.
yeah.
Um,
In the main Harry Potter film movie books, he was the writer of the Fantastic
okay,
Beasts
okay. So,
book.
so
Yeah.
at least they kept that lore.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, that's all there was to go on from. So there
Mm-hmm.
is no history of Newt. There is no real sort of idea of what his adventures were like. So that, therefore, became, in a way, quite an interesting idea. Now you
Mm-hmm.
have this character, which is based in the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. Now, and just remember me saying that, right? Wizarding World of Harry Potter. So it's not just Harry Potter, but in the Wizarding World. Because we all know
Yeah.
this. It's been around for decades now. We all know about Harry Potter. Anybody who doesn't know about Harry Potter today, I don't know where you've been. You've probably been living under a rock or a cave or something. So everybody knows of the Wizarding World. So there's no real need for explanation of how it works. Like, you get muggles who are non-magical folk. Then you get the witches and wizards, and there's Diagon Alley and there's Hogwarts. Everybody knows all of these basics, at least from a UK perspective, okay? Because
Yeah.
all the books are set in the UK, Hogwarts is in the UK, and so on and so forth. So what's interesting about all of this is how they fleshed out a film with very little source material. And that's the
Mm.
point we want to make here. Now, sure, you could argue J.K. Rowling is the source material, okay? Because she's created these universes, or this universe. She knows the characters and the details intimately. So who better than to expand upon this than her?
Yeah.
That's all fine and well, but I think there was an issue here. And that issue is that she may know it all, but unless she's actually written a story around it, she probably is not very good at expressing what the story is supposed to be about. Does that make
Yeah.
sense? Right?
Yeah, to me, yeah.
And the reason why I say that is because when you watch these three films, much of what happens is never explained. Now, to an extent, you're a bit like, oh, but that's okay because we all know about the Wizarding World. But then at the same time, it's not okay because they bring up a lot of things that are only very rarely mentioned in the books and not very well explained into the films, but then they don't explain them at all for, let's say, people who've never read the books.
Yeah.
Now, even myself, as a book reader and a fan of the series, I watched these three Fantastic Beasts movies and I was just like, what the F is going on? Because there's things like an Obscura and the Blood Bond and just things that are Obscura. I don't even think has been alluded to at all in the books, to be perfectly
At
honest. I
all.
stand to be corrected, of course. But like the Blood Bond is, but it's never really like fleshed out as well as it was. Like even the film sort of glossed over it. So now you have this in this new series, but it's never really actually like they don't really explain it properly, and the reason why that I feel comes across like that is because you have J.K. Rowling who knows everything intimately. So in her mind, when she puts things together and then watches it back, it makes sense to her because she knows it so well, versus it being created for somebody who doesn't know the books or the story as intimately as she does. And it's quite an
Yeah.
interesting thing to think about because I often, as the editor of Famous, will often do this with Edward.
Mm.
Edward will do like really great work, and I'll be like, look, you've written this, but you've written this for somebody who knows exactly what you're talking about, but then you haven't mentioned exactly what it means. So I get it and he gets it because we both played the same game, but somebody who hasn't won't. And so that I sort of guide him in a direction of helping him flesh out just a little bit to get the reader to understand. So the reason why I'm bringing that up is because I feel that that's the biggest issue with Fantastic Beasts right now, is that
Yeah.
you have the creator who obviously knows what she wants to do, but the issue is in expressing it and getting it to a point where you actually get the viewer to care and understand.
Yeah.
You know?
But one of my biggest issues personally is not necessarily the fact that stuff aren't explained, because as a fan of the series, I can sort of understand things. I can sort of puzzle things together, which is not a good thing, mind you, as you said, but I'm okay with that part.
See,
What I'm
that's
not
the,
okay
the
with.
trapping of a lot of things like Aragon the film that was also
Yes.
transferred.
Yes,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
get
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Fully. But my biggest issue is how scattered the movie is.
But so
Because it has no focus.
yes, and I love that you brought that up because we both leading towards that same trajectory, right? So it's part and parcel of not explaining enough, right?
Okay.
And in the way that I view it is, so as I mentioned before, Wizarding World of Harry Potter. We know it, we know the basics, okay? Sure, if there are new elements that are introduced, they should be explained to viewers who may not have read the books and so on and so forth, okay?
Yeah.
However, the biggest issue that Edward and I have with this series is how they've taken a very interesting premise of Newt Scamander going on fun-filled adventures to find fantastic beasts, right? Because that was the point. Fantastic beasts and where to find them. And then they shoehorned in a story about Dumbledore and Grindelwald.
Yeah, it
And
literally makes no sense.
The reason why that's upsetting is because fans of Harry Potter, fans who've read the books, would adore to know more about Dumbledore because he's such an elusive character. Even in the books, you grow to love this man and what he stands for and what he does. But his past is so rarely explored. There are moments, okay, of course, because it's integral to the plot, how certain things work out with Voldemort and so on and so forth. But Grindelwald is really just a small story in the grand scheme of Harry Potter. Because understand, the Harry Potter books about Harry Potter, right? So everybody else is a side character. So you don't really get the other characters fully fulfilled or fleshed out or whatever the case is.
Mm.
And so Dumbledore is one that everybody's always wanted to know about. And for me, this is the biggest travesty with the current films. And that is because you've taken one excellent premise, being Newt Scamander and finding, because that could have been such a brilliant, fun series of movies. Every movie he finds like a different creature, and then, you go on a fun adventure. It would be a perfect kids film, that you could make somewhat
Yeah.
entertaining for family.
Yeah.
But then they took this incredibly nuanced, because that's what it is. The story of Dumbledore and Grindelwald is, it's nuanced, it's intense, and it's dark, because it's all about. This is way before Voldemort, right? So Voldemort was the biggest evil the Wizarding World's ever seen, right? But before then,
Yeah.
there was Grindelwald, who was basically the Hitler of the Wizarding
Yeah.
World. He
That's
pushed for wizarding families to not mix, to not have muggles or mudbloods, and he was essentially like like I said, the Hitler of the Wizarding World.
mhm.
And what is so unfortunate about that is there is a incredible story that could be had there, one with political intrigue and how Voldemort and Grindelwald met, what happened to his sister, why Dumbledore couldn't fight Grindelwald. So granted, a lot of these little tidbits are sort of dropped throughout the three films, but
Yep.
but as Edward said, they're sporadic, they are broken, they're there's this dark storyline strewn amongst Newt Scamander and his funny creatures. It just
Yeah.
doesn't make sense. It's just an
Ba-
incredibly poor disconnect,
basically,
of two different source materials.
let me put it this way for those who haven't seen the movies. You get the first 40 minutes of Fantastic Beasts, the first movie, is this wonderful adventure of this guy trying to find this possum type magical creature within a bank. And things go awry, and he ends up warping out, and everything is fine, switching bags with another guy. That's good and well. And then all of a sudden, the movie takes this dark ass turn and gives us this story about this homeless guy called Credence. Well, not homeless. Sorry.
Close enough.
Disparate guy called Credence, and how Grindelwald is working with him, whatever. And that's the next 40 minutes of the movie.
Yeah.
But nowhere. You get little bits of pieces like, oh, we should go on this adventure because the monsters have escaped. That's essentially the gist of it. But also now we have to fight an evil wizard. And it makes no sense when you look at the structure of it all. If they had these movies split up into two totally different franchises, it would have been so much better.
So that's exactly what the two of us were discussing, right? Where you have the one franchise which appeals to a much younger demographic, and that's Newt Scamander going on these cool, fun, cutesy adventures, finding cool creatures. Like, you could even throw a bit of an arc in there. Maybe for the first three films, he's trying to find this extinct dragon and he's getting on the trail or something like that, but on the way finds cool other mystical creatures or whatever. Fine, no worries.
Yeah.
But then the other story, the one Harry Potter fans actually want to hear, is the one of Dumbledore. We could have easily had a 3-film scenario where the first one is how Dumbledore meets Grindelwald, how Dumbledore falls in love with Grindelwald. That brings up another point that Edward and I were making, that we actually realized, is a lot of the times movies will take representation and they will just shoehorn them in without actually doing so in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
So here was a perfect opportunity to have Dumbledore, who is a homosexual apparently, according to J.K. Rowling, right? And Grindelwald was his first and only love. You could have had a movie of the two of them at Hogwarts, coming together, whatever the case is, or maybe even after Hogwarts. I'm not. Everyone's a bit fuzzy on the details, and this is why, because it was never fleshed out properly in the books. All right,
Yep.
it was just alluded to, but you could have had a whole movie on how they meet up with each other, how they fall in love, and then how that love leads to the blood bond, and then how eventually, Grindelwald turns.
Yeah.
or there's a disc, or something happens, and Dumbledore's sister dies in the line of fire, and because of that, he realizes that Grindelwald's not who he thought he was. Or do you know what I mean? There's some sort of a cataclysmic event, and then the next film is about Grindelwald's rise to power as like the Hitler of the Wizarding World. Now, I know it's very strong of me to say the Hitler of the Wizarding World, but that's ideally how he comes across in the books,
That's
even.
literally how they akin him to in the movies.
Exactly. So sure, maybe that's like quite dark source material, but that's fine. Harry Potter fans are old now. People who originally started reading the books, even if you were only 8 when you started reading the books for the very first time. I mean, that came out in 94. You know, like there are
hmm
adults today, 40, 50-year-olds who've read Harry Potter and want to know more, even about the darker stories. So,
Yeah,
so you could easily have 2 franchises in this respect. One that caters towards a much older audience who cares about the political intrigue and the nuance of politics and socioeconomics within the Wizarding world, and then a fun, cute, adventure one, which is for the younger audiences or even teens about finding cool, fun, and magical creatures. And
yeah,
in so doing, Rowling could have taken the time to further flesh out Dumbledore and Grindelwald's story on one side, while, because remember, bear in mind, she already knows this. So this is not new to her. She would just need to flesh it out a bit more, right? Within 3 films. And then,
yeah,
or even 2 films, whatever the case is. And then completely create new fun adventures for Newt Scamander and his Fantastic Beasts.
exactly.
Unfortunately, and this is what Edward and I are saying, is they've taken this really fun, cute, light concept and they've merged it with this terribly dark, political, socioeconomical, whatever you want to call it, concept. They've merged them together into this horrible hodgepodge of 1 minute we're looking at a cute little creature and the next minute Grindelwald is killing people in the streets. And you're just like,
Yeah,
okay, so what kind of movie is
like
this? Because you
exactly,
can't quite get into the serious bits when they're busy dancing like crabs in the next scene. So,
exactly.
you know,
Like
it's
the foundations are there for both franchises. Let's call them branching franchises. But the main issue is that there simply isn't enough to work on. The source material is lackluster, and as Hans said, we can argue that J.K. Rowling is the source material. If it were put on paper, if she had it
yeah, she needs to
edited
write it out.
and
Yeah, yeah.
published, we'd have got an
Actually,
entire, maybe even a multi-trilogy series.
you know what? That's actually a great idea. I know she keeps talking about how she doesn't want to do more Harry Potter. Fine. But then write about the characters within Harry Potter without him. See, so
That's the
the
thing.
whole thing is they keep saying Wizarding World of Harry Potter. And the only reason why Harry Potter is even attached to Wizarding World is because that's where it started off, right?
Yeah.
But the other biggest issue, and Edward he knows this as well, is that they keep shoehorning in Harry Potter stuff within these movies.
Always.
Like,
yeah.
like I watched The Secrets of Dumbledore. There was a literal scene where they take a portkey to Hogwarts for 10 minutes. And it's completely irrelevant to the film. There is no reason for them to be at Hogwarts at all, because the entire story is taking place in America or Europe, or I don't know where it was, whatever. I don't know. It's so bloody
It's
confusing.
America, yeah.
And you're just like, actually, no, the Obscura is in America, but Grindelwald's actually from Europe. So that's also a whole mess of a thing in its own right. You see, there again is a problem, because Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them could have explored the wizarding schools in China, in America, in Africa. Newt could have gone to all of these cool locations and seen glimpses of all of these. Imagine 3 films, right? One in the Americas, one in Africa, one in China. How amazing would that have been?
Like we got
you
this,
see glimpses of the wizarding culture in each of these locations, which, by the way, J.K. Rowling has already fleshed out because they are mentioned in the books.
Yeah, in multiple books. Like we got the
Yes.
teasers, the movie watchers got the teasers in the, I think it was the 5th film, with where all
For
of these
the
schools get
Triwizard
together
Tournament.
for the tournament.
The
Yes,
Goblet of Fire. Yeah.
and you got these Parisian wizards, and
Okay,
they were so different and beautiful. And you got the
understandably,
Russian
I
wizards.
think that was very much I don't think that wasn't global, was it? I think that was just a European. I actually can't recall. But,
I guess it was European.
Either way,
yeah.
Edward is right. Like, I have these, like, I get angry when I think about this, because I'm obviously a fan of the series and the Wizarding World, and I get angry. I'm like, what boomer decided to approve this shit that we got today? Where is
Mm.
the thought of splitting it? Like, I bet you some boomer sat at the top then was like, no, there's not enough Harry Potter in this movie. And it's like, but
Yeah.
that's not what it's about. People
Like, we
know
need
Harry Potter.
sales.
Like, we know the universe. You don't have to shoehorn Hogwarts into everything. Okay?
Yeah.
Like, honestly, it's like, just think about that for a second. As I mentioned, a Newt Scamander story where every movie takes him to a new continent, and then on that continent he's finding a mystery. And then you get images of the magical cultures in the different places around the world. Like, that would have been phenomenal. And then on the other side, you have the story of Dumbledore and Grindelwald, an intense political thriller of that fleshes out Dumbledore and his machinations and Grindelwald and what happened. And you get what I mean? Like, these are such missed opportunities. That's how I feel about it. You can hear I'm getting quite passionate about it. I'm losing my voice even. So again, drawing it back, we talk about the lack of source material, but it's more than just that. So, J.K. Rowling is the source material, and I don't want to discredit her because I feel she really does understand these characters and she knows their motivations. And I'm 100% certain if given time for her to actually flesh out unique stories about their past, she could do a superb job. I mean, I would happily read a 3-book trilogy called Dumbledore Secrets, or something like that. Like The Secrets of Dumbledore, Grindelwald Rising, The Secrets of Dumbledore, Obscura's Delight. I don't know, whatever. You could
Yeah.
just think of things, and she could, explain all of these new things. And the thing is, it's all taking place within the Wizarding World. It's not Harry Potter per se, but it's within the Wizarding World, which is what everybody wants.
Exactly.
Anyway.
Yeah,
Now,
it's sad.
this is not just related to this. So, interestingly, I do want to mention this. So in our previous episode where we spoke about adaptations and canon,
Mm.
I brought up Halo the series. And I brought it up because Halo the series has phenomenal source material.
Mm.
Okay? There's games, there's books, whatever. However, the studios and Paramount made a actual choice to not use the canon, the currently established canon, to not adapt currently available books and games. They wanted to do their own thing. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, that has ruffled some feathers. And the reason for that is because a lot of people wanted an adaptation, but adaptations are seldom ever any good, so I think it would still be a lot of hate regardless. Now, I, for one, actually really enjoyed the first season of Halo. Was it perfect? By no means. No, by no means. Was it very different to the Master Chief and the story that we know? Yes.
Yeah.
But in a good way. In a way that I feel was good for TV.
Yeah.
Also, by telling everybody that this was a totally different timeline, I didn't have expectations of me having to see the Master Chief from the games. I mean, I was already told this is not that Master Chief.
Yeah, it's different.
So then I enjoyed the story for what it was. Now, don't get me wrong. It could, part of, having lack of source material is part and parcel of why the show was a little weak in certain circumstances. But also why that was also a strength of the show.
Mm.
Because they could take elements, right, that they can absolutely draw on for the series, but then they make it their own.
Yeah.
So it was things like how the AIs were created from clones, which I didn't know. Apparently it's in the books, right? Okay. But it's never mentioned in the games at all. So for me, that was a wonderful revelation in the TV series.
Mm.
Then there's a few other things along the way. Perhaps the biggest misstep the TV made was introducing a whole new character to be like a sidekick. Kwan Ha, she must go and die in a fire. Okay, she must just not be there for the second season. She was really the. No offense to the actress, because I think she did a fantastic job. So this is not aimed at her. This is aimed at the writers who decided to shoehorn in a character that was it's exactly the same scenario with putting in Grindelwald and Dumbledore and Fantastic Beasts. It's the same thing. You try to shoehorn in this sidekick character who had their own story, which had nothing to do with Master Chief, when all anybody cares about is Master Chief. Like, what are you doing?
And then worst of all is they don't know what to do with this character after like 2 episodes. So they just stay around.
I'm convinced she's going to be gone for a second season because of all the episodes in Halo, all the episodes that focus on her have the lowest rating, under 4. but every other episode is 6 and above.
I mean,
Now, I
you
know
want to
we don't
see,
really do numbers, but I'm just saying it was just because, again, it was a massive disconnect. Like, whoever
yeah,
thought that Kwan Ha was going to be an interesting character that anybody cared about was sorely mistaken, okay? People care about Master Chief. They cared about his story, what
Mhm.
he's doing, how he's going, and his Spartans. Because there was Spartan Kai in the TV series was a fascinating character. Because
yeah,
she did some, I won't say what, because I don't know, no spoilers, right? But she does something that Master Chief did without anybody else knowing. And then it starts bringing out her personality. And she becomes this incredibly fun, awkward character that you really want to see more of. But then again, because she's a Spartan, she's not some other orphan from some other country who has some other agenda and needs to go back and fight for her family. Okay, nobody really cares.
yeah.
Sorry,
Like
not sorry.
the I think the big issue the story had is they didn't know whose story this was. Like it's called Halo. It's not called Master Chief. But then we have 8 episodes focusing on Master Chief and his beautiful ass, and 3 episodes focusing on this random other chickie. So I
Yeah,
think
100%.
it tries to focus on someone to give it a overall arc. But the writers are like, but this is everyone's story. So
It's
then
not,
make
though.
it everyone's story or make it
Yeah.
John's story. Choose.
You see, the issue there was a lot of cool stuff, right? So John has something in his DNA that allows him to interact with Forerunner technology.
Yeah.
Then there's another woman whose name I've actually forgotten already, who has a similar power, and she's adopted by the Covenant, and because they obviously need her to activate stuff or whatever the case is.
Yeah.
And I personally found that to be quite a compelling story. That was
Yeah.
interesting to me because
Definitely.
it was clear that despite growing up in vastly different locations, Master Chief in the UNSC and being tested on all his life, whatever the case is, and her very similarly, being rescued from destitution by the Covenant, but then again, still being tortured and so on and so forth as the only human, that to me was like, oh, I get that. I can see why they would share a bond.
Yeah.
Because of how similar their upbringings were and how they're so unique that they can activate these things and nobody else can. And, what makes them special, the gravity, you get what I mean, right?
Yeah.
But then you have Kwan Ha, who's just there
Just
so they show you all of this
there.
amazing stuff, where Master Chief and this other lady are pumping and it's beautiful and it's wonderful, and boom, you're back to Kwan Ha. And I'm like, I don't care. I want
Like-
more of the special people doing cool stuff.
Yeah, like why are we seeing this? Now I get the idea is to ground the viewers because sometimes you need that in a show. But even then,
No,
if they
you
give her
don't.
too
Not
much
in something like Halo.
airtime, like look at The Boys, for instance. Now obviously the
so
source
good.
material there is a bunch
So
of comic
good.
books. But even then, the side characters.
Hold on, Ed. Actually, The Boys is a perfect example of source material adapted perfectly.
Yeah, definitely.
That you know why? Because they stayed true to it.
Yes.
So that's an issue I have. Sorry, I don't want to derail you. I want you to come back to this.
That's
So remember,
the point.
remember what you were going to say, okay? Because the whole thing for me is anyone who's read Harry Potter, who's actually read Harry Potter, knows how dark the source material becomes.
Yes.
So don't tell me that the movies have to be PG-13 lighthearted. No, we're at a stage where the franchise is mature enough that we can have adult Harry Potter films. Now, bear in mind, I'm not talking about fornication and swearing. I'm just talking about having subject material that is nuanced. Nuanced to the point where you can have, expositions of character development, and then like political intrigue and like make it like a thriller or a horror even. There is opportunity for that. It exists. Also, at the same time, you could do something completely novel. You could have a James Bond of the Harry Potter universe, an aura that goes out on secret missions to kill or destroy wizarding factions.
See,
I mean,
I
that
love
would be amazing.
But
yes.
but the way WB and the Harry Potter people, the showrunners, all run now, as we all know, Harry Potter becomes an aura at the end of the
Correct.
quantology. But as much as we would love to see a new James Bond type aura, they'll make it Harry Potter. And that's the sad thing because they're going to shoehorn the name in there.
Yeah, you see, that's the problem. Like, Harry Potter's story's done. He
Yeah.
now lives a fairly unremarkable life as the man who lived.
Yep.
Okay? That's it. It's done. It's told. It was an epic arc. He saved Wizarding World. Okay? Awesome. Yes, he will be revered, but we don't need to see him in his adult
Exactly.
life. We don't need to see him carrying on as an aura. You know, like sure, maybe if you want to do like a cameo, you know, like this, like for example, imagine this James Bond character who you know, goes out on missions or whatever, and oops, bumps into Harry Potter, you know,
That's
in like a mission or whatever, you know what I mean?
yeah, like or I don't know, make Harry Potter the boss or something of the division, whatever.
Actually,
Mention the
personally,
guy. But
you could make him like M.
yeah, exactly. Like he's the one dishing out
He's
the
he's the one that's
missions.
telling this James Bond character where to go. And then, oh, you know, I could really imagine a scene where he's like let's say that the character is like fighting back at him or whatever, and he goes in, and he just takes his wand and he goes, oh, but he doesn't have the scar anymore, or does he?
No, it
I can't
does.
remember.
The scar stays.
Are you sure? Doesn't I thought it disappears at the end of the film when the Horcrux disappears from his body?
No, the scar stays.
Okay, well, anyway,
It's just not the
I
Horcrux
can't
anymore.
quite recall, but let's assume the scar is still there. You could just take the one, point it to his scar, and be like, "Listen, I know what I'm talking about."
Yeah,
You know,
like
but essentially, I don't want him to be a main character at all. He must just be some sideline B character that you rarely hear from, if at all.
yeah.
If at all. Okay, because I would be happy with a story without even anything to do with Harry Potter or Ron or Hermione or anybody.
See, instead of making it the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, just make it the Wizarding World. Like
Well, that's what essentially what everybody wants, right?
exactly. Write new stories. Give us new source material so we can get better adaptations.
Actually, doesn't this come down to this was also a big issue with Game of Thrones, right?
Mm.
And that was the fact that the showrunners didn't want to let anybody else write the story.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yes.
Maybe there's something similar for J.K. Rowling and Harry Potter. Maybe she has like a tight grip on it and she's not willing to let other people write stories for within the Wizarding World. Now, for me, that's a huge mistake.
Mm.
What she should do is she should maybe have like call it a Wizarding World Bible, okay? And you
A
give
compendium.
that to people, a compendium, yes. And you give that to writers who are going to write stories within the universe.
Yeah.
So that they know that, like, you know, certain magic can't be used in a certain way. You know, they know the rules of what can and cannot be done.
Yeah.
And then if they have questions, they can then reach out to J.K. Rowling and she can, you know, be like, yes or no. That can happen. No, that can't happen. And then start having unique, fun stories. See, this is the biggest problem here. The biggest problem, and like I said it before, and this is just typically the issue with the world at the moment, is that there are boomers everywhere, okay, who are making dumbass decisions because they only see one thing. And you just already know that somebody at Warner Brothers was like, no, we need more Harry Potter in this film about this guy who's looking for characters. So how do you do that? Oh, well, you shoehorn Dumbledore and Hogwarts into it.
Essentially.
And now you have this amazing story people actually wanted told, but like messed because half of the film is happy-go-lucky and the other half of the film is like, we're going to kill everybody. Stupid.
Yeah, it's dumb.
Yeah, sorry. I could carry
I
on
get
going
that.
on. I could carry on. So what was also interesting and funny about this is like we were talking about source material, and this was just a joke between Edward and I. But I was like, yeah, you know, Amber Heard had bad source material, and that's why she lost the
so
case.
much. Yeah, because she had she had nothing to base her stories on. You see.
So, well, thank you. So see, like, isn't that like it was just a fun, interesting comparison because Johnny Depp and his team had so much evidence. Like, I know there are people out there who argue and they're taking a very, in my personal opinion, an incorrect way of looking at feminism as a whole, because feminism is about standing up for not just women's rights but rights in general.
Yeah.
All right.
Equality.
Anyway, and the thing is, yeah, it's equality basically at the end of the day. Anyway, so anybody who actually watched the trial and watched the evidence for both sides now, not just the one side, but both sides. Listen, y'all, it was clear as day who had the upper hand here. It was so obvious that Johnny's team were not in the right, but they had the evidence to back up everything. Like, don't tell me this person who could record her husband closing and violently closing cupboards or whatever, but then didn't take pictures of all her injuries. Like, hello, that doesn't make sense. If you're consistently taking pictures of your husband, why wouldn't you take pictures of all your injuries as well? I mean, I
Exactly.
take countless photos of my. Okay, that sounds very vain, but I just mean like I take enough photos that I would know if I was bruised like a couple of days ago versus today. Do you know what I mean?
I mean,
Or rather,
yeah.
like I actually do take pictures of sometimes when I hurt myself. Just because you just want to like show a friend, for example.
Yeah,
But now
just
you mean to tell
show it
me that
off.
if you're a sufferer of domestic abuse, you don't take those pictures? Anyway, I'm not going to get too much into it. All I'm saying is that this was also just a great example of lack of source material. She didn't have the backing to keep her story straight. And that's the problem with the movies as well. So when Amber was on the stand, her story kept modifying, it kept changing. And that's why Depp's team was so adept at being able to pick apart her story. Because one minute she's saying one thing, the next minute, oh no, her story's changed and the person doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Okay? And that full-on lack of accountability really is what made her lose. Because come now, to have literally said that every piece of evidence that Johnny Depp's team brought up was incorrect is like, well, you'll be lying then, because it can't all be wrong.
It's
At least
all Photoshop.
like if she had taken accountability for a few of those things, I'm pretty sure that would have actually swayed the jury in her opinion.
Easily, yeah.
Anyway. So what I'm getting at is it's very similar to like the stories and things that we've mentioned now. There's a very thin backing from which to pull this narrative. And then what ends up happening is you have a hodgepodge of stuff that doesn't make sense. And then you can continuously poke holes in the story. And then it becomes unenjoyable.
Yeah.
So pulling it back to the importance of source material in storytelling, it's why, actually, if I must be honest with you, why I'm quite curious about the House of the Dragon that's coming out, the new Game of Thrones series, because my understanding, now I haven't read the books, but I do understand that the books do have a lot of history in them.
Yes.
History that wasn't brought up in the actual Game of Thrones series. So I think, from my understanding, is that they're pulling from that history, but then they're fleshing up on it. Now I'm curious to see what they do, because I do feel HBO has learned from their mistakes, and I don't think they're going to want a repeat of the previous, Game of Thrones ending.
Yeah.
With that said, also I'd like to bring up the Lord of the Rings TV series that's coming up, and the reason why I want to bring it up is because there is incredible source material that you can take, that you can also pull from in terms of Lord of the Rings. Okay. However, what I like most about it, and this is very important, they have planned and fully written out 5 seasons. That's it. They know every single story beat from season 1 through to the end shot in season 5. So what does that tell you? That tells you that they've taken the time to flesh out a full story with a beginning, a middle, and end, and it means that it means it should be good. It's not like how I can guarantee you now, Fantastic Beasts 1, 2, and 3 were not written as a whole.
Oh no, not at all.
There was a thread that somebody had an idea of, and then they just wrote them after every film, and that's why it's such a mess.
Yep.
So yeah. Ed,
Yeah.
any other examples you'd like to maybe bring up or talk about? Sorry, I feel like I've steamrolled you in this.
No, actually, you like all the points I made, you kind of ended up into anyway. Which means we're just vibing. That's all.
Yeah. Okay.
At the end of the day, I think you're spot on. No extra examples I could think of.
You see, I don't know. It's just so. That's also not to say that something that doesn't have source material can't be good, right?
Of course.
That's not what we're saying either. It's just that it's important to lay a groundwork, a foundation of something. And if you don't have that foundation, then things seldom work out. Like a very, very, very good example of this was Lost, the television series. They recently admitted, which for years they had denied, but the creators recently admitted about a year ago or so, how they actually didn't know where the story was going to go, and that they had an idea, but they'd never fleshed it out as much as they could. That every year they would then start, expanding because the show was so popular. So they were like, what could they do, And then, Lost is still an excellent TV show. It has many, many good things for it, but really towards the end, it did kind of go a bit like, that doesn't really make sense anymore. What's going on? You had this incredible premise, and now there's flash forwards and flashbacks, and then the ending was essentially purgatory, which everybody spoke about and everybody guessed, but the showrunners kept saying it wasn't for years and years and years, and that is technically what it ended up
They
being.
just ended up copping
or,
out.
or rather not that the show takes place in purgatory, but when they die, they all go to their version of heaven.
Yeah.
Basically.
Which
That's
is
basically how it ends.
limbo, I guess.
No, it wasn't limbo. The ending really was.
No.
They all.
The show was limbo.
Oh yes, the show was like a limbo. So
Yes.
they were alive, they were living, they were experiencing it, but when they died in the show, they then all go to their own heaven.
Yeah.
That's essentially what I got.
Yeah.
Anyway,
But
long story short, it was never fleshed out. It was they never really sat and were like, okay, we want to do 5 seasons, beginning, middle, end. This is what's going to happen. You know.
That's
So
yeah.
What do you think? For those of you who are listening or watching, are there any other examples we may have missed? What movies or TV shows do you think, could fall within this whole thing of lack of source material, or had really good source material and still messed it up? I mean, look, technically there's a lot of things with good source material that get messed up along the way. But ideally what I'm talking about here is things that don't have a good source material and still end up being bad. Versus things that have a good source material and then end up being bad, because that's just that's just poor adaptation. That's just a lack of understanding the canon, for example. Actually, one last thing that I want to mention, and again, this comes back to my whole boomer comment that I mentioned earlier, and that is how Sony, with their Spider-Man license, which really Marvel just needs to take back. They just need to pay whatever they need to pay and just take it back, because Sony's Venom was rubbish to begin with. Then they made Morbius, which tanked at the box office. And then get this is the best, this is my best. Some boomer thought that all the memes for Morbius meant that it was becoming popular again. Look, whatever boomer thought that was a good idea doesn't understand memes, because you get memes that are about something that's good, and then memes about something that's bad. All the memes for Morbius were how bad the film was, which means that no one's going to want to watch it. They will laugh because it's so bad. They don't want to watch it and then laugh. They don't need to, because the memes have told you everything you need to know.
Exactly.
So it was really funny, because I saw another meme about how Morbius is the only film to bomb twice at the box office. Because,
it literally is.
Because whoever thought it was a good idea to re-release it because of the memes really just doesn't understand meme culture. And this right there is a bigger problem and a nice big discussion, perhaps for another day, about how out-of-touch generations are ruining the world today.
Yeah.
But I will leave that for now. And on that note, I hope you did enjoy this episode about source material and how it can influence stories and movies and things like that. Ed, anything you'd like to say before we end off?
No, it was a good one.
Okay.
A really good one.
I felt it was good as well. I really enjoyed it. Okay, well, for those of you out there, if you did like this episode, you know what to do. That means like and subscribe and share, okay? Just in case you didn't know. And from myself and Edward, thank you so much for tuning in, whether you're listening on your favorite podcasting service or you're watching us on YouTube. Either way, we do hope you enjoyed it, and please do comment and reach out to us, whether it's on social media or on the platform of your choice.
Yeah.
So until the next episode, thank you so much, and ciao for now.
Bye.